Ultimately, my aim is to live a well-balanced and happy life where I feel fulfilled in my day-to-day endeavours. Now, in my pursuit for fulfillment and happiness, I chose a career in surgery, a career in otolaryngology or ear, nose and throat surgery. And I'm quite blessed in that regard because I get to fill my days with performing very fulfilling procedures and enjoyable tasks. I get to speak to patients, I get to speak to professionals, some of which I consider my friends. So from that regard, I'm quite blessed. But as with any career, there are a lot of problems within the system, and these systematic problems, especially within the NHS, seem to be occurring on a daily, if not weekly basis. And this leads to a lot of discontentment within the profession, and as a result, people will start searching for greener pastures. One of the greener pastures that people commonly talk about is the USA. And in today's video, I thought it would be an interesting thought to rationalize my behavior and thoughts about moving to the USA. This video is kindly being brought to you by TrueLearn, which are an incredible online platform that are committed to helping you pass your USMLE examinations, which are essential for your move to America. So we'll hear more about TrueLearn at the end of the video. So to truly understand my rationale for staying put in the UK, it's important to know a little bit of background about me, where I come from, all that good stuff. So I was born in London, raised in London. I went to university in London. You're getting the drift here. All my friends and all my family are in London, and I truly believe London is one of the best cities in the world. And I've been blessed that I've been able to be relocated in London at every stage of my training, from school through foundation training, through core surgical years, and now thankfully through my specialty training years. My family all live in London, my friends all live in London, and I really value my time outside work, and I value the relationships that I have with my mentors, the people around me, as well as my friends. And as you can probably tell from my Instagram, I do love being away, and my proximity to top travel destinations is a must, and I think London offers that. But we'll talk more about that later. So with that in mind, let's actually start going through the sections. Now I'll start off with the most important section, that of family, and this is a difficult one because I've always been quite family orientated. I see my family a couple of times a week, and irrespective of what's going on in my life, whether I have exams, difficult rotations, night shifts, I always manage to slot in my family. They're a big support network within my life, and I really do enjoy being around them. So to be separated from my family for a period of time would be very challenging for me. Now, a residency in the US is usually 5 years and probably a year for a fellowship. But really, if you're heading to the US to do a residency, you're in it for the long run, because life gets really good when you become an attending a consultant in the US. So really, you're thinking about a move almost forever. The closest place in the US is likely New York City, which is a 5-hour flight. But it's not just a 5-hour flight. As the recent pandemic showed us, borders can get closed very easily, and you could be split from your family for a prolonged period of time. Now, speaking to some of the doctors during the pandemic, they were split from their families for 2 to 3 years. And God forbid, if something happened to a family member, or if they were unwell and you couldn't visit during that time period, it'd be very difficult to reconcile that. And I know, speaking to a lot of these doctors, they felt very guilty about leaving their parents and leaving their family in search for these greener pastures. So that's family. The next consideration is that of lifestyle. Now, if I was based in a very small village town in the United Kingdom with no real prospect of leaving, the appeal of America would be probably higher. But I live in London. I live in one of the best cities in the world by all accounts. Yes, it's a bit expensive, but apart from that, it's an incredible city. And so looking over at New York, I don't fancy New York as much. I don't fancy Los Angeles as much. And there are also very few cities that are comparable to London within the United States, apart from potentially San Francisco, which would probably be my top choice, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Houston, Austin. There are very few cities that I'd actually move to. So the process of becoming an international medical graduate, taking time out to apply to these very prestigious, very difficult programs within the best cities in the world actually becomes a lot more difficult. Not to say impossible, but becomes very difficult. So the next thing to consider is that of training. Now, I'm going to be examining this from someone who's secured a very competitive otolaryngology position in London, in one of the most prestigious centres in the world, that of North Thames. This likely means that my move to America for my training will be very unlikely. But for argument's sake, let's compare my life in the run-up to this position versus what it would have been like in my run-up to residency. To secure a North Thames London training position, I needed to go through foundation training, which was 2 years. I needed to go through 2 years of core surgical training. In that time, I needed to sit 2 exams and publish a couple of papers and do a lot of audit and a lot of interview practice. Probably a sacrifice of around a year of cumulative work. If I was to move to the United States, and let's say I was after a Mount Sinai, New York City otolaryngology residency, I would have needed to sit the USMLEs, which are 3 exams. There's quite a significant cost to them, and this would likely have taken 6 to 12 months of my time, the last of which I would have needed to move to America or fly to America to actually sit. I would have also needed to have performed an elective in America. The ideal time to perform this elective would be during medical school, but since I was out in South Africa and South America having a lot of fun, I didn't do that, so I would have needed to do an observership, which again I would have needed to have paid some money for. Now, the route that most of my friends take is also to do a postdoctoral fellowship or research fellowship at an institution that you want to work in, and that can vary between being 1 to 3 years in length, and that's a really good way that a lot of my friends got their letters of recommendation and also backing for their application to match to a specific residency. Now, a fellowship is essentially where you are able to refine your skills, and all you do is operate on that particular subspecialty day in, day out. So for the most part, people do this towards the end of their training when they decide what specialty they want to go in. If you want to become a rhinologist, you may find a prominent rhinology figure that will teach you how to perform sinus surgery at a very advanced level, and they will likely be one of the few people in the world that can perform this operation, and it's fantastic to learn from them. Most people in the United Kingdom will do a fellowship, especially if they're trying to pursue a subspecialty. If they're going to be a general ENT surgeon, it's unlikely that they'll do a fellowship. The sites that people go for their fellowship are likely stay in the UK but go to a different centre. A lot move to Australia or New Zealand, where there's a fantastic work-life balance. It's a bit of an adventure for young families, and also you get to learn from incredible surgeons. And then the true hardcore surgeons will go to the US or Canada, where it's a bit more intense. You'll do a lot of operating and you'll learn a lot. Similarly, in America, a lot of people do pursue fellowships, sometimes more than one fellowship as well. Now, after all of this, which could be, bringing yourself up to 4 years from medical school, or 4 years from when you decided that you wanted to move to America, you still have no guarantee of actually getting into that residency program. And for the vast majority of cases, they actually prefer their own graduates, people that went through the American system, even though the UK system is equally as credited. And if you compare those 4 to 5 years that are needed to obtain a match in the US versus the 4 to 5 years that I've spent in the United Kingdom, in the UK I've been working, I've been having a great time at work, I've been learning loads. Yes, not all of the information is relevant to my career in otolaryngology, but I have a lot of general background about health and medicine, and I feel more like a doctor, and I can advise my friends appropriately. And I've been paid for the past 4 to 5 years, and I've been working maybe 48 to 50 hours a week on average across the 4 to 5 years, and I've had an incredible life outside work. I've been able to go on holiday multiple times a year. If I was to compare that to my life had I wanted to go to America, I would have probably been quite isolated while I'm revising for the exams, while I'm writing all those research projects, and probably working harder in a postdoctoral research fellowship than I have been in the UK, sitting exams, writing articles, creating audits, and also performing a full-time job. Yes, you can argue that it probably takes you 4 to 5 years to secure the most competitive jobs in New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco, and that's not really essential for you, and you could probably match into a good program somewhere in America that you may not have heard of. But for me, the trade-off between London and a city that I'd never heard of in the middle of the US it's not worth it. I'd rather stay put and live a great life within London. It might be even more rewarding. The next point of comparison is actually comparing specialty training in the UK versus residency. Now, it's unlikely that you'll be appropriately trained to be an ENT surgeon during your foundation years. Some people take an interest during your core surgical years, but it's really in your specialty years as a registrar where you're someone's top priority to be trained. Now, the UK system will be SD3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's a 6-year programme with the addition of a fellowship if you so wish. And some people do 2 fellowships, and also some people slot in PhDs and postgraduate degrees like masters and things in the middle of their training. In the US, it's usually a 5-year system, of which the first year is more of a general sort of surgical and intensive care rotation. So it's really only 4 years of true ENT surgery compared to 6 at least in the United Kingdom, probably 8 if you count in your core surgical years where you've been exposed to the profession. As a result, the UK system exposes its graduates to the specialty for a much longer period of time. And you can argue part of that is service provision in your core surgical years, but for the vast majority of your registrar years, you'll be performing truly relevant things for your training. Now, in the United States, you will probably be working a lot harder on a day-to-day basis. The number of hours worked per week varies dramatically based on the program and how senior you are, but it can vary between 60 to 100 hours in that period of time. Now, this won't be active working, but this will likely be time at work. Now, in the UK, you'll probably be working around 48 to 60 hours a week. You probably will be on call for a longer period than that, but it's unlikely that you'll have to come into hospital for the entire period, but you may have to come in to see an individual patient and then you can go back home. The second thing within the training I wanted to talk about is the requirements to become a consultant. So in the United Kingdom, there are very clear guidelines on what needs to happen before someone can be deemed a consultant. They need to perform 2,000 operations electively. They need to be involved in 1,000 emergencies, perform 1,000 night shifts. They need to have performed at least 10 head and neck cases, major head and neck cases such as laryngectomy or a thyroidectomy. They need to have performed at least 10 core procedures within each subspecialty independently before they're considered a consultant. Now, I don't think the requirement in the US has a numerical attachment, but I do know that the UK surgeons operate a lot more and seem to be a lot more confident in their operating by the end of their training versus the US doctors at the end of theirs. The source of this information is UK doctors going to America for their fellowships, and they see the numbers that the American doctors operate on, and they also see the skill that they operate on. Now, I know this is very subjective, but this is really the only way that you can find out information about how good a program is. Now, within the US program, there are advantages in that you have protected teaching, whereas in the UK it's more sporadic and very reliant on your trainer. Luckily for me, within the North Thames region, within London, the trainers seem to be quite fantastic and everyone absolutely loves the mentorship and training that they receive from their trainers. But there are no core weekly or daily teaching, but the daily teaching that exists within the US system doesn't exist within the UK, and rather you're confined to potentially just weekly training, which at this time is done over Teams, which is less effective than the US residency. One of the biggest points within the training programs is that the US system, you are sponsored by an individual program, by an individual hospital that takes complete ownership over your training and will support you through whatever you need. Whereas in the UK system, although now you're confined to a smaller deanery, such as North Thames, South Thames, you're still rotating between up to 50 to 100 consultants, of which some of them may decide that you're there for 6 months and then you're gone. So may not take a big interest in your training. That could be very problematic, especially if you only get to visit a subspecialty for 6 to 12 months. If you miss out on that 6 to 12 months, that could truly impact your overall development as an ENT surgeon, and it may mean that you'll need to take an additional year or revisit a subspecialty that you would otherwise not have revisited. The last point within training is that of exams. Within the UK, you have to sit your FRCS examinations, which are your fellowship at the Royal College of Surgeons, your exit exams, where this is a specialty exam for ENT surgeons. It does cover a lot of things about plastics, max facs, and a lot of allied specialties, but for the most part, it probably will be the most difficult exam you ever sit. You need to be up to date with all the latest research and all the latest management, as well as all of the physiology and things that you learnt in medical school. There's also a Viva that's extremely difficult, but once that's done, you're certified, you've completed your training. As soon as that exam is done and you've met all of your clinical or surgical competence, you are then a consultant. Similarly, in America, you need to sit the board exams for otolaryngology and head and neck surgery, which are probably just as difficult as the ones in the UK. This brings us to our last point of compensation. Now, on the whole, your training in London versus New York City is going to be very similar, and by the end of your training, you will likely perform a similar number of operations to a similar degree. But where it really changes is the level of compensation for your time. In the United Kingdom, when you are training, your salary ranges from between 35,000 at the bottom end to around 65,000 at the top end as a registrar. In the US, during your training years, you're on a similar number, I think around $60,000 to around $90,000. But what happens when you are certified is completely different. In the United Kingdom, you have to apply for a consultant job. On the whole, within the ENT specialty, being the third largest specialty, ENT consultant jobs are plentiful. But if you want a particular job in a particular centre or a particular location, you can be waiting a year, potentially 2 years for that particular consultant job. Whereas in America, you will always be offered, almost always be offered, a consultant position in the centre that you trained in. These guys knew from the beginning that they were going to have you for your residency and also employ you thereafter. So that's the first difference. No fighting for jobs. The second is that in the United Kingdom, as a consultant, you'll be paid between 80 to 100,000 in your first few years as a consultant. Being the chief, being the boss, in America, that figure's around 500,000, between 300 to 500,000, depending on who you speak to and how honest they're being about how much money they make. That's a huge difference in terms of lifestyle, in terms of working. In London, £80,000 wouldn't get you a £400,000 mortgage, which would barely get you a studio apartment somewhere nice. Whereas £500,000 in America, you'll be paying off your student loan in one go, and you will likely have a huge mansion and a supercar or a sports car, and you will live a completely different life. As a result, most UK consultants will pick up a second job, a private job, and use that to supplement their income. Now, most people can't go private immediately because they haven't got the expertise or the clientele or the marketing to go private immediately. And usually after 2 to 3 years within the NHS, they've got enough confidence as an independent practitioner, as an independent consultant to actually offer their services privately and deal with all the legal paperwork and all the other stuff that private practice brings. So what you usually find is that a UK consultant, on top of their 40 hours within the NHS, will likely do an extra day on a weekend to supplement their income. And depending on how senior you are, this supplementation can be anywhere between £50,000 to £200,000 for that individual day a year. Which means that an ENT surgeon within London, for example, can probably earn £200,000 to £300,000 and live a very nice life. But they'll be holding down 2 jobs, they will likely be working 6 days a week, and probably this does get tiring. Whereas in the US, you operate on lower numbers overall. It's unlikely that they have a second job because of the system compensates them so well. The other point of comparison is if you compare the elite surgeons within the UK versus the elite surgeons within the US. And when I say elite, I mean that from a financial perspective, not a surgical skill. Because on the whole, the really surgically skilled patients will be doing very complex, advanced operations that aren't offered privately and they're done on the NHS. But if your concern is purely that of money, the most well-paid ENT surgeon that I know makes between 1 to 2 million a year. And for that, this particular person works quite hard. I'm sure there are people that get paid even more that I'm not aware or haven't been open with how much money they make. But that figure in the United States is probably closer to 10 to 20 million in terms of how much money they make. So overall, I don't think you are compensated very well in the United Kingdom, and it's likely that you'll need to have a second job as a private consultant if you want to live in a big city like London, and if you do want a fairly upper middle class life where you have a semi-detached house and you go on very fancy holidays and drive a nice car, which again, you don't really need. But they are my thoughts on the topic. Now, before you hear my conclusions about the topic and my decision, well, you know my decision, but my decision moving forward, I'd like to give you a short message from our sponsors, TrueLearn. Now, TrueLearn is a smart bank that produces very high quality questions to help you with your USMLE examinations. All of their questions focus on quality and are set to a very high standard to ensure that the material replicates the true life exam questions that you might experience. They have a beautiful analytics page which allows you to analyze the information so you're producing the best results from the information that you had. They also have a very powerful analytics page which will allow you to track your study habits, look how you're performing compared to your peers, and actually improve the insights that you have so you can learn in a more smarter fashion. Now, all this put together allows their students to outperform their competitors by 20%. So I would really encourage you guys to check it out. And the bit that I found really useful, especially for this video, was their resource library, where there's a wealth of knowledge about the USMLE application process and also residencies. So please do check them out. There will be a discount link in the description below. So in conclusion, we've talked about quite a lot in today's video. We talked about family, we talked about life, we talked about training, we talked about compensation. And the take-home message is that my life in the United Kingdom, my life in London is pretty great. It's not incredible in terms of compensation, but overall, I'm not too bothered by that. I don't really have a huge requirement to be earning hundreds of thousands of dollars in the future. Again, I go back to my first statement from this video. I want to live a happy, balanced life where I feel fulfilled. And I think the compensation is a bit arbitrary at this point in time. Now, this may change. I may have requirements. I may need to support my family. I may need to support other people. I may have passion projects that I'd like to pile money into. But for now, I don't see the benefit in moving to the US. All right, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.